All right. We're here with Wheelchair Sports Camp and Joshua Trinidad, who is part of Wheelchair Sports Camp but has his own albums as well. Um, and they've just been, I know that Wheelchair Sports Camp has just been in the studio as well, too. So they're making records and then they have a bunch of, I shared links to your music. So hopefully the students have had a chance to check out your work. Um, and it's a pretty informal conversation. But maybe we could just start off by you guys introducing yourselves to everyone.
Yeah. Thanks for having us. My name's Kaylin. I'm the wheelchair of sports camp, and I've been into rap music since I can remember. Um, it's got me into a lot of different things that is outside of rap music, but I feel like all because of rap music. So I'm also an educator with Youth on Record. I went to CU Denver for recording engineering, um, and uh, I have been known to be at a lot of protests. I kind of get off on being in the front lines, and so uh, got arrested for sitting in Senator Cory Gardner's office, which spiraled into me rolling for mayor as a April Fool's Day performance art joke that was very serious for for over a year. And yeah, I'm now just jumping into installation art and gonna be doing a permanent installation with the new Meow Wolf. So I've just got myself involved in all these things that I could never really imagine um, because of rap music.
Mhm.
Started writing my own raps when I was 12 in sixth grade for the talent show. My first rap was about the Broncos winning the Super Bowl. Uh, and I guess like every year after that, I pretty much signed myself up for a talent show, which forced me to write a song. I'm a pretty weird songwriter as far as like, I don't have a ton of songs that I've written that haven't been published. Well, now's a little bit different, but I kind of had to like sign myself up um, to do something in order for me to write songs. I wasn't an avid writer like I am now. I just kind of had to like give myself a task. Um, and starting wheelchair sports camp in college was kind of one of those tasks. Like, okay, now we have to release things. And it just like slowly evolved into a band, and we um, played with a lot of different people in and out. And I kind of love like the evolving sound of wheelchair sports camp and collaborating with different live musicians. We just finished writing a musical for Alice in Wonderland, a new production by Family Theater Company, which is the first big theater company in the country of all different disabilities. So they've been holding it down in Denver for 30 plus years now. And they asked us to do original music. And they wrote an original script, and this is their first time doing like an original production. But COVID canceled everything, so it's given us a little bit of time to perfect it and like make it better and workshop the script. So that's exciting. Dipped into public TV, did a couple episodes for public TV after the mayor thing. But yeah, just all around wild, wacky art.
Great. And as I was telling Kaylin when she logged in, I voted for her as mayor. Yeah, yeah.
So I'm Josh. I've been part of Wheelchair Sports Camp. Um, what is it? 9 years, off and on. 10 years.
Really? Yeah.
I think it's been something around that. I met Kaylin at Westward Music Showcase. She doesn't remember this, but she almost hit me with her wheelchair, like really close. Like it would have been real bad, and it was just like zipping around. But I was able to catch her performance and just loved the music that Kaylin makes, and asked if I could sit in. And the next thing I know, we're here 9-10 years later, still making music together. What's that?
Around the world and back.
Yeah, literally. I will say that making music with Kaylin has been different for me than what I was raised with musically. What I mean by that is, the way that songwriting was taught to me and the way that I've learned it through Kaylin. For me, sadly in some ways, but good in some ways, I guess, I learned songwriting through the academy, through school, and can be very restrictive in some ways, but can be essential in others. But I think looking at the music that we make and the ideas that we get, sometimes that can't live in a traditional way, so to say. So I think being in Wheelchair Sports Camp actually pushes me personally to continually thinking outside of the box. I think some of the most inspiring things for me, even outside of like Wheelchair Sports Camp, that other projects I play in inspire from here a lot. And it's conversations with like Kaylin and Greg, who just joined us. And I mean, there's a lot of time we spend in a van together where we're talking about really weird things at really weird times in really weird places that just are pretty inspirational. So yeah, that's me. I play trumpet in the band. And Greg, if you want to introduce yourself. And
Hey, what's up? I'm Greg. I play drums in Wheelchair Sports Camp. Yeah, Josh hit on a lot of it. Like, I think that's a big thing. I think when you're in a band and you travel around, you have a lot of time to talk to each other. You have like 7-hour drives, and you get to talk about like philosophy and concepts and the books you've read and the stuff you've studied and the music you're listening to. You get to pop on records. So it's kind of fun to be in a band at the level that you're touring, because then the songwriting process, it's not just when you're in the studio, it's like this whole conversation you're having about what the band is before you even make it to the studio. So yeah, I'm Greg. I play the drums, and that's my story.
And anyone can jump in at any time, but you are the first like full band that we've had join us, and so no one. I mean, people have talked about a little bit about collaborating with other people, but what is it like writing together as a unit? I love what you just said, Greg, about how like the part of the process is like going on in the van and all of that. Um, but yeah, how do you guys write collaboratively?
I think we're still figuring it out, and I think it's changed and should change, and is continuously changing. This COVID thing kind of forced us to write the musical a lot more remotely, which I felt like kind of worked out to our benefit in ways. So like Greg started um, a lot of the tracks just like with drums, which we had never tried before. So he kind of laid out like a basic structure, and then I would chop those drums into like loops and like create the arrangement. And this last project, that Alice in Wonderland, got reconnected with a very, very old band member who hasn't been in the band for about a decade. So like, I think that's the cool part about collaborating, is it kind of always changes depending on like who you're collaborating with. And like, this is a conversation that we've been having a lot, is we all have our own styles of producing music or publishing music. You know, Greg is way, um, like, he's the driver's, you know, he's in the driver's seat, like, let's get it out, let's one take, like, come on, let's just push it, push it. And some of our other collaborators, like Wesley Watkins, is like a perfectionist to the max. Like, he will work on one album for his whole lifetime. And I'm kind of like in the middle, where it's like, you know, I want to perfect it, but I also have to have deadlines, or else things don't get done. And you know, Josh Trinidad, you know, he's always working on something outside of Wheelchair Sports Camp. And so like, he's a guy that, you know, we can always come to. Hey, we need like, you know, some loud, noisy kind of stuff. Or there's, and other times it's like, yeah, we need to take this song to church because it's too noisy. And we've made a lot of really cool collaborative connections through each one of us, you know, like, Josh Trinidad has a Rolodex of musicians that, you know, I don't have, and I have a Rolodex of rappers that none of them have. And but no, except Greg. Greg's got a couple rappers that I don't know. But you know, like, it's collaborating is just, it's a big monster. It's like beautiful, it's messy, it's really, you know, because we all have different communication styles too. And I think that's something for me as a collaborator that I'm trying to work on, is how do you communicate your ideas and how do you articulate, um, in order to get the best of your collaborators. And, you know, ultimately, you want all your collaborators to feel safe, and you want them to feel, like they're contributing. Like, I don't ever want to be the person that tells you exactly what to play, how to play. And that sometimes is like dangerous, because I'm like, yeah, just do whatever. And I have, you know, like, we collaborated with Michelle Rocket from the Milk Blossoms on this last project, and she's like, yo, I need structure. And I'm like, just start, you know, just go. You know, so like, collaborating is a lot of communication. It's a lot of communication. And, you know, the older we get, the more we realize how to have healthier relationships with each other and how to communicate our feelings. And that's the other thing about, you know, music, is it's such a personal, vulnerable, intimate thing that, you know, like, it's hard not to take things personally in the studio, in the writing process, because we put so much of our lives and our souls and our heart into what we're doing. And so, you know, if I spent all night working on something, and then Greg's like, oh, you should try it like this, I'm like, you know, what do you mean? So we're still figuring out like how to collaborate best. And I feel like every project, is different, you know, and sometimes it's better remote, and sometimes it's better to have the energy of each other in the same room, you know. But when we're all in the same room, it's like coordinating schedules and like coordinating that communication style and all of it. So yeah, it's a big mess that we're still unraveling. And it's getting better and better. Every project, I feel like, has had more collaborators and has a better sound. And we're figuring out ways to do it better, you know, amongst each other. And because we do spend so much time with each other, like, brings up a lot of things, you know. We have a lot of like old baggage that we're still working through.
Yeah, and I think too, it's interesting with recording. Like, I think of it sometimes like, you know, when you're making a movie, it's pretty obvious that you're like doing a scene and you're trying to replicate like, oh, that scene when, you know, your dad was mean to you and it feels real sad or whatever. And in music, it's almost not as obvious. So you're sometimes trying to figure out what you're trying to like get out. So sometimes it's a little bit more of like in your subconscious, something you're trying to get out. And then when you're recording in the studio or you're working with your friends, sometimes that stuff is coming out and you don't even know what it is and you're trying to figure it out. And so it's like, that's why I think sometimes it's like a movie scene where you're handling something like maybe traumatic or super fun or super something super, you know, something big emotion. And then you're channeling it and you're opening up like space for that in the studio, and then like you're all experiencing this weird thing, and so you're all like, it's frustrating. And then it's like on top of that, we all have like, you know, egos, and then we all have like big expectations for what we're doing, and everybody's trying to like funnel in their big expectations. And so it gets weird. So you're dealing with this like weird emotion that you don't even really know what it is, and then you're dealing with everybody on picture day trying to like get their outfit looking the best. And then at some point the photographer has to be like, all right, it is time to take the picture. And like that's the thing that we always kind of like deal with. And you know, so that's, it's like this thing you have to figure out, like, okay. And then in music too, it's like there's not much, like, especially nowadays, because there's not much, the budgets are so much smaller than they used to be. There's not really like any structure. So like you don't have deadlines half the time, and you don't have anybody, like you don't know who's the boss. There's no like HR department. So like you're all just kind of like in this like mess trying to create something. And that tends to be like the hardest part of it, is you're like, okay, there's no structure, we're in chaos, like how are we going to come up with something here? And like Kaylin was saying, was like I tend to be like a kind of person, like I produce records and people hire me to help them through that process, because I'm kind of that mindset of like, you're good, that's the best you could do, like practice harder, come back to the studio next year when you're ready for your next record, and that idea will fully come together. But this time, this is the idea, and let's get this and move on, because we want to, you know, I think the biggest thing I see a lot of young artists do is they get in front of themselves, and they don't get that one song out that could become the launching pad for that next song. That's the actual thing that they want to do. Because if you don't do one song, you can't get the next one. And then the funny thing is, now that I actually have a little bit of perspective on my career, and I can look back at records I did, you know, 10 years ago that, you know, were professional, I can look back at them, and everything that I thought sucked about it is actually like the coolest things, because it's kind of cute. Because I'm looking at myself 10 years ago, I'm like, oh, that was kind of cute. Like you didn't know how to do that. And it's like, it puts a vulnerability there, or all these things that you could actually put a positive spin on. But when it's you, you're just like, oh, that was sad. I missed that fill, or, you know, the singer was off key, but then you're like, oh, that like actually makes it like endearing or something, you know. But yeah, that's how I feel about that stuff.
Yeah, I totally agree with Greg, and I think I put out my first album in 2004 or 3, and it's funny to like look back like almost 20 years ago on that, and I can remember like feeling a certain way about specific parts and being super self-conscious about that, and being like, I know this part really sucks, but I'm gonna put it out. But now I listen back to it, I'm like, actually it's kind of cool. Like that's actually maybe my favorite part now. So I totally agree with Greg. It's something that I've learned though from these two is like just the process of writing. Like there was a point where me and Kaylin I would just send files, and then she would chop them up, and then I would hear back what she did, and then I relearn that, for the performance. And so it was like playing, giving her something to work with, her composing, and then me learning the composition. And I think that that's been a really cool process too, is to kind of flip songwriting a little bit on its head, where I have to learn from chops, like cutting up specific audio pieces. And I think she's done that with you too, Greg, right? She's probably taken pieces of your drum, or you have to relearn some things.
I like doing that too. That is a fun way that like Kaylin's really good at chopping up stuff. So like, and she'll pick stuff out that I never would have thought, you know, like even just that thing, like what's that one where I like drop the stick, and then there becomes a thing like that. And then that becomes the next part of the writing process, is like figuring out how the hell I'm going to play that live. And then that's like a whole nother thing I think that we're all pretty good at. And I think Josh brings a lot of that to the table, is we're all like, we kind of take our songwriting in a hip hop way, and then we go, and then when we perform, we're kind of almost take it into a jazz direction where there's a lot more improv, since there is that kind of open way of taking the jazzy thing and then Kaylin chopping it into a hip hoppy thing. And then sometimes when we come back to playing it live, it gets a little bit more jazzy and open again.
Yeah, and that's what these two have brought out of me, is like, I'm rapper brain. I'm stuck in a loop, you know, like it's quantized, the beat is exactly this. It is exactly this BPM. And so it was really scary for me to let go and like let them play live, because I'm like, no, I can tell Greg is at least 2 BPM faster, because my words are not fitting the way that they're supposed to. And I fill the bar typically all the way. So like any kind of discrepancy in BPM is a big difference for me. And one tour we went on, we got to Kansas City and I forgot my laptop with the beats, and I like had an internal meltdown, because you know I need that click. And you know they're like, well, good thing you have a band. And I'm like, yeah, but you know the beat. And it you know, like the beat, the the track, the chops, the samples, like those are kind of like sometimes for in a live setting like a pacifier for me. Like it's like a safety thing for me. And so you know, playing with these two have like really brought that improvisation thing out of me, which I am like pretty against as a rapper. I like never got into freestyling because it was always such a like machismo like party killer to me. And so like the idea of improving in hip hop is ciphering, you know, and I never really like got into that like all my other rapper friends. So like improving with jazz, it's like I had to really like let go. And like sometimes, you know, they'll go and then I'll hear like a verse that'll kind of fit over a groove, and then I can like rap. So it's not like I'm freestyling, but I'm definitely improvising like my pocket, my cadence, my tone. I started like matching pitches all out of the blue, and I'm like, whoa, did you hear that? I kind of like matched your key, and I have no clue about any keys, you know? So it's been like a really cool um yeah, I think we all three have learned so much from each other, because we all came to music at different places, you know. um it's pretty cute.
Yeah. I just had something I thought of, and then I forgot it right when I hit the mute button.
Yeah, there was a time that Greg like dropped his stick. It was,
Oh yeah.
I don't even know if he's playing. He just dropped it, and it had this weird, like when I looped it the way that I did, Now I got a new nickname called El Chapo because this is like my favorite thing to do is like finding little weird things, and I'm like, oh, that's sick, you know, like, and I looped it, and it threw, like, if I put it on a click, it's like so weird. It's like the weirdest off rhythm, but it's on rhythm, and that became a song. So yeah.
I remembered what I was gonna say, Caitlin. I was so like one thing I've been thinking about a lot lately with performing is like I don't know, when I was younger and when I was like in college and stuff, I would always think I had to know like all kinds of beats, which I guess at that time I was kind of building my vocabulary of like all different kinds of things. So if I came into certain situations, I could play different things. But now I'm just like, instead of, there's so much information out there, especially with the YouTube, you know, like even like when I was in college, like, and that wasn't even that long ago, like YouTube was barely, you couldn't find like drum lesson videos or tons of recording stuff on it like you can now. So now it's like overwhelming. You could almost figure out anything. And so now like when I'm like recording, before I go to record or before I go to songwriting, I really dial in on what my influence is at the moment. And then I really rehearse on that kind of stuff then and put myself in that place so that when I go into the studio or I enter the songwriting room, I have ideas that are relevant to the situation that I'm in. Because it's like I'm really big on like especially as we get older, we try not to like spend a lot of time, like you don't want to waste people's time. So like if you spend a lot of time prepping ahead of time, then when you get into the studio to write or get into the rehearsal space to write, you have those ideas and you have those references too, that, and you know, like if, especially too if you're writing with people that you really know well, you know what references they're gonna understand. So if I go like, oh, like Josh, like you know, like on like Miles Davis Kind of Blue, how that first cymbal splash is like louder than everything else, you know, like when it kicks in on So What, it's like and then it's like loud. He'll know what I'm talking about. Or like if I'm talking to Kaylin and I'm like, oh, you know, on like Outcast Aquemini, you know, when the vocals at the very end are like repeating that cool like statement, you know, like when I close the curtain, you know, it's him and I, Aquemini, you know, like talking about maybe death, you know, or whatever. I can use, if you can use those references that your other people will know and understand, then all of a sudden everyone's like light bulbs turn on. They're like, yeah, that's cool. And because ultimately too, there's no rules to music, right? So especially when you're creating your own stuff, there's no rules. So in order to get your other people on board to what you're doing, you have to almost be able to like explain it in a way. So if you kind of come into the situation with some things in mind, because like I think sometimes as artists we think we have to have like everything, like, oh, I got to know everything, I got to have all the influences, I have to, you know, and then you end up being like spread too thin. But if you kind of dial in on some things that you really like, you know, like I'm a drummer but I really like some lyrics, I don't pay attention to a ton of lyrics, but I do like some lyrics, and those ones that do stick out to me, I'll pull them in as references, or you know, all that kind of that thing, so I can actually like try to be able to communicate in that situation.
Yeah, I even think just hearing Greg talk right now, it's kind of like making me think of sometimes that us three have recorded or played together based upon reference. And even from that now, like us three have common reference now too, where being a band, we've experienced live shows together, we've like listened to albums together, and now we also have like another level of like our own language based upon the common inspiration that we all have. I like what Greg said though, is like there's no rules to this, and I think that that's awesome to hear, and I hope you all take that as like some really good advice. I got hung up on rules too much growing up, being classically trained, and I felt like I had to have specific pieces because that's what I was graded on growing up, but none of that matters actually. And so I love that Greg says that, because some of my most favorite music, I don't think about rules, or if that's even a thing. So I'm glad that you said that, Greg, because I think that that's really good advice about rules.
Yeah, Trini's the rule follower of the group for sure. We,
Yep.
I kind of am.
We're always trying to get them to break rules, but it's hard.
It
It's
is
part of
hard.
our songwriting process. Is getting Sydney to break a rule, and then we write a song about it.
Yeah.
especially when crossing the border, you know, he gets like, make sure everything's okay because we have been stopped breaking the rules for sure. Yeah, Greg brought up something too that makes me think one thing that, which is funny, one thing that I get lost in is like I'm always trying to create. I would love to be all original, you know, and create a sound that hasn't been heard. And yet I'm a sampler, and I think that like um you know, public domain is such like an important thing. And it's 2020, like I go back and forth all the time with like everything's already been done. And then no, like we this is totally unique. And so yeah, that's one thing that I have got lost in, you know, is like trying to be completely different. And it's just like silly because that's that so many things have been done, you know. So like there have been times where Greg, you know, will be like, you know, give a reference, and it like I'm like, I don't want to be like them, you know. I'm never gonna be Andre 3000. And then which is like such a contradiction to my feelings about sampling and my feelings about like arranging and producing, because I have sampled all these different people, and yet like it doesn't feel like I'm copying them, you know, like I'm sampling it. So it's a trap that I have fallen into of like creating this own sound and creating your own voice and finding your own thing. Like there isn't rules, and it's gonna come, you know, and it might sound like something else, and that's not bad, you know, like it's really not a bad thing, because it's you know, and it's a time stamper. And I think that is one of the important things about publishing your work as often as possible, because it does timestamp your life, you know. And so many of this, every song I've ever put out is like, you know, up until our first album is me in my bedroom with a microphone, and you know, it's like lives on MySpace, but like I can still go back to that and kind of see where I came from. And it is really nice to see your own evolution just for yourself, you know.
Yeah, one thing that's fun too. I was thinking about is because I have some friends that are in town right now, and we've all done this. We've all have so many friends from out of town now from touring, and you start to like be on the road in this way where you start to see people like 4 times a year, and you start to realize like, oh, I, you know, and some of your friends you have in town you see 4 times a year, you know, and like you start to see these people, and then they start coming to your town, and all of a sudden you're like seeing them like 8 times a year. I have some friends in town right now, one from Santa Fe, one from Phoenix, and we were watching all these like 94 Woodstock things last night. We were just up all night, just like watching all like we were watching like Blind Melon, we were watching 9 Inch Nails, we were watching like all these different ones, and it was interesting to watch that too, to watch just kind of like how songwriting it evolves too, like even this like the performance songwriting, like 9 Inch Nails, for example, is a good band that you can see their tones evolve over time. Like I'm a big 9 Inch Nails fan, and we were watching the 94 one, and they were all using like Yamaha 90s tones that sounded really funny to me because, you know, I was born in 86, so 94, like those tones, like all, and now looking back, they sound dated to me. It has like this like connotation of like, oh, that's the keyboard that everybody had at their house and we were messing around with in our basements or whatever. And then, but it's interesting now that on the scope, I can look back at it too. I'm like, yeah, it's kind of interesting. Like his tones always kind of like evolve to match it. Like the songs are always the, you know, pretty much the same, but it was interesting to watch the tones, and even just the tones of bands in general, just like in the 90s, how like, no, like, I mean, Nine Inch Nails was playing with a little bit of MIDI backing track stuff, but like Blind Melon, like watching them, like no backing track, like so much feedback on the mics because they can't like digitally recall all this stuff, and how much of that chaos that, you know, we're talking about earlier in the songwriting was like part of like the live show. And now a lot of the live bands are taking a lot of the chaos out by having a lot of stuff, and kind of like what Kaylin was talking about with like the laptop situation. But, you know, who knows, like what will be cool, like maybe it will be cool to sound like a thinner band, you know what I mean, soon, like because it's gotten so thick. I mean, if you think about even the evolution of like of hip hop, like, I mean, like, you know, like WAP, I guess, would probably be one of the most famous songs right now. And it's like, so every all the tones are super thick, but like really musically there's not even on the drums, it's like now they don't even have a kick drum sound. It's the bass and the kick drum are the same thing, and it's kind of like it's kind of thing out. And I wonder, like, I kind of hope that maybe rock and some styles of music will get more thin again, where you don't have to hear like you don't get used to that MIDI, because I think right now it's pretty obvious that almost all rock bands tour and they play with like a MIDI backing track. So even I remember I went to a tour and I saw like every band had a MIDI backing track except for one, and that band sounded like tiny. But like, I don't know, it sounded cool to me because it sounded more real. And that's like a choice I guess you can make too in the studio. Like, how do you want to sound? Do you want to sound more like a live band that has like human error, and or do you want to sound like more like chopped? And those are all decisions, and none of them are a wrong decision, but it's just a decision that you kind of have to make. And so if you're talking like hip hop, like, do you want to sound like, you know, Erykah Badu, Mama's Gun, where it's like, I'm sure they're doing some sampling in that, but the samples are much larger portions of an arrangement, right? They're maybe taking an 8-bar phrase and sampling it, as opposed to just taking one measure and sampling it out. So you can kind of like find your home in that. Like, do we just play this song front to back? Can we play this song front to back when you're in the studio? That's a thing too. Like, are we that rehearsed? Maybe not. Or maybe too, you get to a level where I think, you know, we're getting to now is like, we just did a live performance for a rally that's going to show pretty soon. I guess it's not really live, but it's like we played it live, and they're going to show it in like a rally with AOC for a Get Out to Vote campaign. And we hadn't rehearsed in like a year, but we were able to get together, play the songs like 3 times, and then get it. And that's like, we now know that we're at that level where it's like we don't have to worry too much. We can just kind of rehearse at the place while the engineers getting the mics ready and the cameras set up, and then all of a sudden we can play it. So just kind of think about that with I think it's a good thing to think about with your bands and stuff, is like, you want to get to a level where you guys can execute, you know, efficiently. But if you can't, you know, there's so many different tools you can use to clean it up and chop it up and work, punch it in and all that stuff that, you know, is super easy nowadays.
Do any of the students, anybody have questions? Or just thoughts?
I'd be interested too, if any of the students want to say like what projects they're working on, or what they want to, like what kind of stuff they want to work on.
This is my favorite part about teaching virtually. Just wait.
We're eyeing you, Connor.
All right, you called me out. I'll ask something. So you guys were talking about when you guys are working together, and just like how, I guess, sensitive dynamic that is to work in a band. How do you, I guess, when you're just sitting there, you have your, I guess, a specialty for that you contribute to the band, right? And but you guys have this song, you have a work of art that you want to put together, and you have a vision for it. You guys were talking about like, well, how you how do you put yourself out of that to produce something that's collectively you as a group and not you as a person?
That's a great question, Connor. Right on. Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to kind of, in my opinion, that's going to kind of naturally come about with you just all being together, you know, with it kind of going through everybody's hands. Like if you're all in the room, it's like if you're having a nice, like energetic balance creatively together, you know, you're going to be drawing from everybody. It's like I think of music a lot in the sense of like a conversation. So like if you're in a, say you're standing at a party in a circle with like 4 people and you're having a conversation, and you know, like if everybody's kind of doing their job, like then, you know, everybody's comfortable in that conversation. You have one person who maybe is willing to be more outgoing and keep the conversation rolling, one person who doesn't really want to talk that much, but nobody's like bugging them, be like, hey, you need to talk more, you're too quiet. And then you got, you know, have all these different personalities, and if everybody feels comfortable and like nobody's stepping on each other, because it's real easy, like in music and in general, I'm sure like you've experienced this too, is like there's some weirdos, right? We're all weirdos. Like Josh is so weird, Kaylin's so weird, I'm so weird in our own ways. And that's what kind of led us down this path, because it's like, it's definitely a path with a ton of resistance, you know? So the fact that you guys are even in school studying this kind of puts you, you know, in our category of you're now a weirdo, welcome. But like you just have to be able to communicate to all these different kinds of people who are not the best at communicating, and so they all probably communicate better through their instrument. But just making sure that you know, if it's somebody's time to shine, let them shine, and if it's somebody's time to lay back, make sure like you like comfortably tell them like, yo, lay back for a sec, you're gonna have your time to shine coming up, you know, trying to balance it out. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, and I think there, you know, there might be songs that like are you, you know, that might be more for you. You know, in the 10 years of us playing together, you know, there's songs that are way more me, and I really like took the driver's seat on that, and it's like, hey, this is for me, I have to do this, and they kind of support me in it. And there's other songs where it's like, yeah, that's Greg's song, because, you know, that's his time to shine, and I lay back a lot. And there's other songs where it's like, you know, this is Trini's song, Josh Rich. You know, so I think it can be both, you know, like not every song has to be an equal group experience. There's one song that they continually force me to do by myself a cappella, and I hate it. But, you know, it works, you know, they ended up being right, you know, because it's less distracting, and you can really hear like my words, and like that the words of that song are probably one of my more important songs. So I don't think it always has to be equally collaborative effort, and that's okay. And that also is tough in a group, because you also want people to feel like they're contributing and like they have some kind of ownership in the project. So like, yeah, I think it really comes down to like the trust and that communication of like, hey, this one's like really more for me, and you know, I really only need like 2 notes from you, but like it probably will spark another song to follow that's like not everyone's going to be like that, you know. So I think it's okay to like have your own thing too.
Yeah, I think that's totally true because as like a trumpet player, it's kind of like, I don't know, hearing a trumpet on every song, it's like it gets a little much, I think, after a while for some folks. I mean, I love listening to trumpet music. I do that a lot, but for some folks it's just like you can't do it. So I have spent a lot of time rethinking like my sound in this band specifically, and like taking something that's very ancient and monophonic to playing in pedals. And actually a lot of that, some of that inspiration actually comes from you, Roger. I'm not saying that because you're here, but it's from watching you too growing up, and seeing the cool stuff that you've done, Roger. So I think, as we think about community songwriting, like you have been an influence too, and you've influenced me, which influences these two. So I know that it's that cyclical piece that like is continuous when we talk about community songwriting. So yeah, I've thought about like, what can I do with this instrument? What kind of creative possibilities are there? And so now it's like I have my wheelchair sports camp rig that works with this band, and I've actually just been rethinking that rig during Rona times. Like, is this who I really am anymore? Is this who we really are anymore? Do I need to sound like a robot all the time? Not, maybe not. So just thinking through those things as well.
Yeah. Thanks for saying that, by the way. And also, like, it was so funny when you guys were talking about Joshua being like the rules guy, because when I play with you, Joshua, it's very free. It's like it doesn't feel like there's any rules for me, but it's so funny to hear like
Yeah.
this different context.
Yeah, I like playing with them. They feel like I'm a rule follower. Then I went to play a gig with you, or like Jeff Jenkins. Jeff Jenkins will be like, "Wow, that was really out there." I'm like, "Oh, I've been spending too much time with these guys." So it's a
Yeah.
weird balance. Like, it's really weird.
And it's funny because you end up in like, in a lot of different groups and a lot of different situations. And I always find myself as like, I can't be Greg in wheelchair sports camp in my other projects. I have to fit into, I feel like that fits in great to Connor's question too. It's like, you might be that person, and what role do you play is going to change whether in what band you are, because it depends on like, all the other musicians and what they're into and how the structures that they follow and stuff like that. And because that's the thing about wheelchair sports camp that's like super amazing, but also sometimes can make it difficult, is that there is no structure. And that's how we want it. We want to go in with like this zero structure mentality where it can be chopped, it could be a live thing, it could be a jazz standard that Kaylin's singing over, and like we're always just trying to force each other into like um uncomfortable situation. So it makes it for at times like it's like big highs and big lows, because you're kind of like you either hit or you miss, and it's an interesting thing. And I find myself in wheelchair sports camp, like, because like other bands, like I have another band called Rubedo, and in that band a lot of times I have to take more of a leadership role. So I have to like make sure everybody's being heard. And then in wheelchair sports camp, Kaylin has like more of a leadership role. So like, I get to be like, hey, let me be heard. We can do like different, you can kind of do a different way of doing things.
So we're already kind of on the topic. I wondered. I mean, a lot of you work, on community projects anyway, and like Youth on Record, which we haven't really talked about in this class this semester. Although Stefan from Flowbots has been in previous semesters. Um, I'm wondering how you guys sort of think, or like you're also very like activist oriented, and how you think about your relationship to like the broader music community, or a Denver type sound or anything like that, or aesthetic. Just any thoughts about how in this class, like one of the underlying conversations all semester has been that we're all in this COVID thing, right?
Mhm.
And we're also in the midst of like a pretty robust national discussion about changing some stuff.
Yeah.
And like what one of the questions is like how, like on the other side, if there is another side of COVID, can things be different, like more equitable and things like
Mm.
that. So I'm wondering if you guys have thoughts about any of that, and just relation to community and
I'll let Kaylin go first, and she took her mic off. I want to talk to definitely about the Latino experience that I've seen change here, especially with the Westward Music Showcase. Like my cousin was in a band called Love 45 back in the day. His name was Paul. He was like the only Latino like in the scene at the time, and now there's like this boom. And when I created my band Ghost Star, I was like, I want to change some shit. Like I want to like get noisy, get weird, and like do the weirdest shit so that we can literally make noise for minoritized folks. But it's been dominantly a white scene. I mean, when it comes to those that get like the representation, not to say that like minoritized music isn't happening. It is always happening, but it's not part of the dominant culture. And so that's been a big issue. But I think Kaylin may speak to this like from her lens, but I think this band has also addressed those issues like from multiple lenses. So Kaylin, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on all this. But you know, ultimately as creatives, we're problem solvers and we're dreamers, and I think that art plays, a way more significant role in changing things than it may get the credit for. Um, and and it doesn't have to be, you know, like political themed songs in order to serve, the revolution, because like we all need time to rest, we need time to reflect, we need time for joy, and we need time to like feel ourselves and to like connect on a heartbreak level. And so like I think for us it's never been a super or at least maybe for me it's never been like a something I set out to do. It's similar to music in that I can't stop thinking about it enough that I have to do something. It's like sitting in bed crying is just like not gonna do it. So I had to go be amongst community. I had to go to marches. Like, I mean, in middle school, as soon as 9/11 happened, it like, I was like, how does no one around me care that we're just in two wars overnight, And I'm 17. So I had to go find that community and I had to go be amongst other people and I had to find my crew. I had to find people who felt similarly, who cared as much as me. And that relates to finding your crew to play music with. And that relates to finding your friends that you call friends for 10 years, that it relates to all these relationships. So I think, I think art is, the biggest driver behind revolution, and it's a similar idea. And like in order to change things, in order to dream up this new future, it has to start as a dream. It starts as this idea, and making it happen is exhausting and terrifying and hard and has those highs and has those lows. I mean, every single project I've ever done is like just this roller coaster of emotions that I'm now feeling every day because of COVID, because of quarantine, because Yellowstone might erupt tomorrow, like it's a very similar feeling of writing a song. And I think that that's not like that's not an accident, you know. Like, I think that we are the change makers, you know, and we're the creatives. And it doesn't have to, like, you know, this was hard for me as like a, you know, becoming more socially aware and getting to an age where like things bothered me so much that I was grieving and that I was learning and that I was reading and I was connecting to a different community that, you know, wasn't in my household. We I had to like dream up this. It's like sci-fi, you know. If we're dreaming this world without police, um, you know, we have to dream it, and ultimately we're living in a really shitty old white dude's dream right now. You know, like somebody dreamt this terrible system that we call the norm now. And so like we have to honor our ideas and our visions, and that doesn't have to be like early on me caring about things. It was like, okay, I'm going to be a political rapper, you know, and I'm just like almost regurgitating Democracy Now. It's like my friend calls it like book report raps, you know, and now I'm like, oh God, I cannot handle that, you know. Like, I read Democracy Now. I don't want that in my music. Actually, in my music that I'm listening to, sometimes it's like mumble rap to get me through the day because it allows me to like focus on something. So like it doesn't have to sound or be this thing. Again, no rules, you know. But I think uh 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 Victor, or there was a famous quote that came out of Chile when they overthrew um, their aristocrats, and it was like the first democratically elected social Marxist. He said, "You can't have a revolution without an anthem." So, like, you know, you can't sustainably do all this struggle work without having these times of joy and these times of grief and these times of heartbreak. And music gives us that outlet, you know, constantly.
And it's kind of interesting with touring too, like even on like smaller levels of touring. Like I think a lot of people can think of touring and they're like, oh, you have to be in a bus and you have to be playing, you know. But we came into the like with the DIY culture touring, so we didn't even have enough money to get hotel rooms. We barely, at the beginning, we're just getting gas and like maybe covering expenses, like, and I think Kaylin was dumping money into it to keep it going. And we were all just like, okay, it was just like, let's go. But in that, you know, like through that, we have so many friends in so many different cities across now, like, you know, a lot of North America. And we can and talk about politics, like what is going on in Mexico, what's going on in Kansas City, what's going on in Long Beach. And like, you know, we keep up with all of our friends, and our friends and the bands in the other cities a lot of times reflect our band. They're diverse bands with lots of different thoughts, and they're all trying to figure out the same thing that we're figuring out. You know, even when we were kicking with our friends from Mexico City, Sierra Leone, like they're like almost actually a little different because they're like a little bit upper echelon there. They have like their parents are like politicians and stuff, because like in Mexico it's like you can see a little bit more of a divide. Like to be even a DIY touring band in Mexico, you have to be like upper middle class. Whereas here in the United States, I see, you know, we see all different. You can get a van and hop around, but in Mexico, like the roads are, you have to pay, like it's expensive, huh, Kaylin, to pay to like drive. Like they don't have like public roads. It's all a toll road. And from talking to people there, I know that was because they had a president whose name was, they had shirts that would say like fuck Salinas. And I was like, who is that? And I was talking to the guy, and it was like, we were there, it was like I think right when Trump got elected. And they were telling us that was like a Trump guy that they had that were like he took their roads, and they were public roads, and he privatized them to his company. And then now that president still to this day owns the roads in Mexico. And so to drive around Mexico, they basically have like a wealth tax. You basically have to have, I mean, it was expensive. It was like $20. Like it was like tolls that were like more expensive than like some New York bridges. It was just like $20 to go on like, you know, a freeway that there's no cars on, and then you hit another one and it's another $20. So it was costing us like on top of gas like another like $80 just to get to the next city in Mexico. So it almost separates people in this different way. But you just start to understand what's working and what's not working in other cities and in other countries, and that brings like a broader scope. One thing too for me, we worked a lot with the late great Ike Owens, keyboard player. He played in a great band called Mars Volta that we all loved. He played with Jack White, and he played with Sublime. He played with a bunch of cool bands that we all love. But I remember I first worked with him, and he's a black dude, and we were like, he took us to a hotel, and we were getting ready to record an album, and he's like, let's go to this hotel, it's gonna be great. Mars Volta played, and we stayed at this hotel, and it was just such a fun time. We like owned this hotel. We just had the greatest parties. It was great. It's like a hotel for like, you know, rock stars to stay at. And he took us there to stay. And then we were in the parking lot hanging out. And then he walked up later, and like a security guard tried to kick him out. And it was just like a big eye-opening experience for me, because that I'm a white boy, and like that never happened to me. I walk in any parking lot, people don't sweat me. And then just watching this, because in my eyes, this is like, he's like a god to me, you know, he's like my favorite musician. And to see like him get demoralized like that in the place where he brought us to show us this feeling, he wanted to like give us this feeling of that we're rock stars, we're gonna do this great record, we're gonna have a great time. And like being on tour, seeing that, you know, has been cool, very eye-opening and good for me to like learn like how different things is, because you really learn how different things is for different people when you travel with them. You know, like me and Kaylin have a great relationship traveling together, and I get to see through her perspective, being right next to her, like what that's like. And then it, you know, helps me understand, so I can be helpful, because I think we all need to be helpful in this changing time and do what we can, you know.
Yeah, I think that's another asset that like doesn't get the credit that it deserves, and it to me is as important, if not more, is like having authentic relationships. Relationships to me are the greatest asset. You know, if everything does melt down tomorrow, like who's your close crew, you know, and if you end up getting stranded somewhere in the middle of nowhere, like who can you call, you know? And like I feel so lucky and supported because we keep up with all these different people from all walks of life, from all different places of the earth, that I know that like when and if shit hits the fan, like I have people that I need to check on, and I know there's going to be other people checking on me, and or, you know, in a not so catastrophe way, you know, like we're working on a new project and it's kind of out of our scope, like this Meow Wolf project, or even like Alice in Wonderland. It's like, you know who we should call? So and so. Like, I know this one person that's really good at this. They're not really great at being on time, so let's call so and so to be on time. And that, you know, like this relationship creates this network that, you know, in my eyes for this future is and I think COVID has really brought this out to the surface, is, you know, interdependence and mutual aid. It's like, if we don't want to rely on this old white dude's dream, then we have to rely on ourselves. And that's also like part of the DIY ethos of like, you know, we hate this, so how can we do it better ourselves, you know? And we can't unless we have relationships with other people, because we're all good at things. We're all good at things. And we're not all good at everything, you know? And so that's the collaborative idea of working on a song, in the same way that it's the collaborative idea in working for our future. You know, it's like, how, who's good, who's good at cooking, who's good at making the dance party, who's good at holding me when I'm in serious grief, you know, who's good at getting me all fired up when I need to, like, go into the storm. You know, we have to have more and more resources in order to not rely on these systems that we don't believe in or that we want to dismantle.
Any other questions from students? I feel like you guys have been quiet today. Keep thinking. I did want to ask you guys about the 187 BPM um, demo that's up there. I mean, partly because I just really like it, but and it does a lot of things sonically and texturally that I find appealing anyway in music. So, but it seems like there's a more of a story from there's a little narrative on your Bandcamp page for the track. So I wonder if you guys could talk about the making of that track. And
Yeah, this is another, like, very one time, like, collaborative thing that we never tried. Greg and Wesley actually went to the studio without me. I had just threw in my hat for the mayor's race, and I was pleading with them that I couldn't run for mayor because we had to work on music. And they were like, just let us try some things. And they went across the street and recorded something at 187 ppm, and they thought, you know, that would be funny. And Greg was definitely trying to bring this more punk thing to the table that we've done live, but never on record. And so they went across the street, they recorded, you know, fairly, like, scratch thing of them just jamming for 7 minutes at 187 ppm. And, you know, the rapper in me was like, great, another Fuck the Police song, because 187, you know? And so I started writing. I ran into Paul Castaway's mom on the train, and I think I was wearing a button. Paul Castaway was a native disabled guy who was having a mental breakdown in the trailer park. His mom called. The one of many stories where somebody called to get help, and made it clear, hey, you know, and they knew because they had been to the trailer park in the past for his mental things. And, you know, she made it very clear he's in an episode. He may hurt himself. And they showed up and they murdered him in front of the trailer park, in front of all the children. It still haunts me. And his last words were like, "What's wrong with you guys?" And so that story was, like, really heavy on my heart. And again, I had just jumped into the mayor campaign, which was really hard for me spiritually to jump into, because I feel so deeply for, like, these communities that I'm now, you know, a spokesperson for. And I hate the idea of being a spokesperson for this giant sea of people that I can only speak for myself, you know? So it was really, really like a really hard spiritual time for me. And this, 187 demo thing was like an outlet for me to be mad, to feel that rage, to like kind of rip my spirit open and start rapping over. So the song like started many years ago, not many, two, three.
I think two, but maybe three. I don't know. That was like the first one we did, huh? For that we've been working on for a new album.
And that's the only one that actually like you and Wesley just did on your own.
Yeah, and that even too, just in like to the songwriting part of that is like we were like Wes is kind of not he can be kind of like hard to catch. Like if he'll be like he's just very like emotion driven, so he'll be like out playing, and sometimes he just is the happiest just playing on a street corner or playing pool or whatever. And so it's like we had like me and him were in the studio together, and I was like, we're gonna do something and it's gonna come out, and that was my that was my mission with it the whole time. And we kept hitting roadblocks the whole way. Like we couldn't figure out how to get like more than one mic working on the drums. So I was like, you know what, we'll mic the drums with one mic. And then I was like like just going with whatever we could, and we did direct on his synths. And then I was like, all right, Wes, we got this big long thing, chop it up real quick. And he did. And then and then he lost the stems. So then Kaylin and I were having going through another thing, like because I was on that mission, like it's got to come out. And like she was like, well, now I don't have the stems, I can't mix it. I was like, well, just act like this drum and bass thing is a sample, and then ultimately it came out and became like this beautiful thing. But that was an interesting thing where at the beginning I was like, no, this is coming out. And I had that mentality, and then it ultimately ended up becoming like Kaylin took it to this whole nother level that became like super beautiful. But I'm glad that we didn't take little things along the way to catch us up and like stop us from ultimately doing that, because it was something we wanted to express, but it was something that we were worried about expressing too.
Yeah, and it was a weird like sensitive thing for me. I think it's definitely the most violent song I've ever written. And me being a white girl, it's like it's a sensitive subject. And my friend just left, who we had been working with her and like with her bands, and she's a great vocalist and plays with the punk band. And Greg and I both were like, it still needs something. Like my verse wasn't enough. It was a good jumping point, but we needed more of that, like the screamy part that I asked Machete Mouth and Coco La later to jump in on. And ironically, Janae Machete Mouth had this also violent "Fuck the Police" song that her group at the time, her collaborator, was not comfortable with, because she's like, it's pretty anti-police. And so she already had this song that needed a home, and it just fit so freaking perfectly. And then Corinne jumped in, Cocola, and she's like, tick tock, and it was like, oh my god, this is what it was missing. And again, the original thing was like 7 minutes long, and like there was no way I could rap that well for that long. So like it did take on kind of its own life, and I think every great song eventually starts to write itself. And then the timing of the release, the uprising was happening, the riots were happening, and this was like a very ragey song that I'm like, I can't believe we wrote this and we're sitting on it. And I live right by the downtown, and so like I could see the smoke, I could hear the sirens, and I'm like, oh god, do we drop this? And it was like this really intense thing for me of like, we're putting gasoline on a fire, and we're in our 30s now. And so we we're not ready to burn everything down quite like we used to. Like, we're still ready, but it's like we have to be smart about what we're burning down, you know? So like for me, it was kind of like it took a lot of thought and energy and spirituality again, um, to figure out a way to release this with being helpful or contributing and not taking up space to promote the band. Janae Machete Mouse father, Black father, was dying at the same time that we dropped this, and she grew up on the same block of Minneapolis that was on fire. So like there was all this intense stuff happening, and there's 3 Black people on the song that I was like, yo, is this right? Should we not? How do we? And so like yeah, that statement took took a lot of thought, and I then Greg and I flipped roles where I was like, we got to drop it, we're just gonna drop it as is, and he was like, no, give it a second, let's get it mastered. And I'm like, come on dude, you always just want me to drop it. And he's like, no, but it's got to be right. And I'm like, oh my God, you know? And he was right, you know, like that's the balance of us, you know, constantly going back and forth. And like, we sometimes have to, you know, push on each other, and it does create a better product in the end, and we got it mastered. And I really sat with the idea of the statement, and then we sat with the idea of how to raise money with it, who to raise money for, which was actually pretty easy because there's only one serious abolition group in town, Colorado Freedom Fund, that was bailing people out. They're still bailing people out every day, paying for people's ransom. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was a lot of thought, and energy to put that out, but it had been written years before, and it had been written about many other countless killings. And then when we dropped it, it seemed like, okay, we just wrote this because of George Floyd, you know, and that wasn't really the case.
Yeah, that's super interesting. There's something energetically to me about that track in particular that was just like I don't, partly the mixing, but mostly just I don't have good words for it, just energy.
Yeah, and you know, Greg's good about this. Like that's, you know, more important a lot of times than the quality of sound, you know, the energy. And that's hard because we get demoitis. So like a lot of the times my favorite take is the one of me at home. It, you know, with all the noisy apartment sounds, and yet as, you know, an engineer, I'm like, I want to go put it on a better preamp, you know, and a better mic, and it's going to sound better eventually. But sometimes it does lose that energy. And I think the studio can be like a spiritual sucker and a vacuum, you know, so it's always hard to play that balance. And I think this was a song that, like, when we try to play it live, we're about to have to rehearse it again. It's really hard to recreate.
Yeah. It's chopped up. The sections are really weird just because of all the weird process it all went through.
Yeah, I wasn't able to chop things, just drums, just beat. Like I only have a wave, you know, and so every rearrangement that I made, it's choppy. It's real choppy. And there's like static in his cable. Like, I mean, it's real lo-fi.
Yeah.
And I mixed it, and I'm very deaf, so yeah, it's fun though, and it, you know, it can't be recreated for sure. And we have to recreate it live, and it's very difficult.
Yeah, well, I think it goes back to something I think Greg said earlier, or when you were talking about the stick drop sound or something like that. Like I mean, it's partly serendipity, but it's also just like that ability to just capture the one unique moment kind of thing, and the feeling of that, like, and the way you guys were talking about listening to earlier records, and Joshua was talking about it, like the cooler things or the things that are cute, right? For me, I think it's important, yeah, just to like throw things out on Bandcamp, like not always studio albums, but just like because it's a kind of documentation of where you're at in that mental space or moment. So
We're actually in this discussion right now because I have some demos that I'm considering just dropping as a mixtape, and we're kind of going back and forth of,
yeah,
do we drop it now? What's the right time? Is there a right time? Is time real? I don't know. You know, it's yeah, it's tricky.
yeah, yeah, and different for people's different goals too, right? I don't have a goal anymore of like building a kind of career. So it's just like, you know, COVID hit and I wanted to like deconstruct the communist man, or the the internationale, and so I made a song deconstructing that and just put it onto like Bandcamp or whatever. But like, but then there's like other times where like I want to like make a whole like a fully produced record again, you know, and just different times for different things, I think.
Yeah, at the time it made sense, you know, to just live on Bandcamp. But you know, now I think we're gonna eventually distribute it to get it on streaming and a video. But you know, at the time it was solely to raise money. You know.
How do you, so your videos are really great, by the way. Is and we haven't talked about that at all. Is it something that you guys decide on together, or do you just work with different videographers?
Yeah, I mean, we usually have a pretty big role in the concept. Yeah, Greg and I are pretty into concepts and ideas. But it's another collaborative mess of working with videographers that we love, that are also hard to communicate our ideas with at times. And it's again that balance, that back and forth. You know, we've been working on a video now for quite a while with our longtime collaborator, Chris Bagley, who's done the Heart Out Here for a Gimp video and the Dance Off video. And you know, it's that tug of war of like, we have these great ideas and he has these great ideas, and how do we collaborate so that we all get our ideas across, and that, you know, we come out with a product that we love. And um, it's just, yeah, it's another one of those collaborative tangles. And yet it's so important, you know, like we can't not put out videos, and they they take a lot of time and money sometimes. You know, some videos don't, you know, like this 187 video. Uh, a dope artist in town actually made a short film using that song, so now we're gonna go back and just kind of edit what she already did and hopefully make a music video out of it. So that's like a quick one. But the ones where we're, you know, concepting, have taken time. Or like Mary Had a Little Band, that was a concept that Greg came up with before he was in the band, of like, hey, you should do a photo shoot where the room is just your size and everybody else is scrunched in. And by the time we could even attempt to pull it off, he was in the band. And you know, we couldn't afford to build the set like we're still trying to make happen. We tried to do it with our Meow Wolf room. Like, it's just, and so we had to do it green screen, you know, which is Mary Had a Little Band. And working with that videographer was really an interesting collaboration, because he had ideas that weren't vibing exactly with what we had in mind. And we just kind of had to like, um, negotiate and and it came out great. Like that's a lot of people's favorite video. But I think neither Greg and I can watch it without being like, oh, if we only could build that room for real.
It's funny how that is too, because it definitely speaks to like that video in particular speaks to like a particular people. Like when I show it to them, they're like, "This is the most amazing video I ever saw," and I was like, "Man, if only if you could see what we were thinking." But the good thing about that director, or he was like a little bigger than we were at the time, so we didn't really have to. We could just say our piece like maybe once, and then that was it. And then a lot of times now we work with people who are more on the artist side and like maybe potentially less productive side, but they're more just like head in the cloud side. And like, we have to bring all the structure to the table. And that kind of sometimes makes us feel like we're banging our head against the wall. But I think we're starting to find a better stride with us being more structured when we come to them, so that when we reach a creative block where we're like, hold on, like he's not doing anything we talked about on the phone, we actually like have references and things that we like can say like, yo, Chris, here's a reference that we talked about. Like, how is what you're showing us right now anywhere near this reference? And then actually have that conversation. Whereas before we weren't organized enough, and still to an extent not organized enough to have that conversation, so that we can kind of weed out the bad ideas without just having to like be like, I guess we have to go down this rabbit hole that this guy's on. Like, we can actually start to control the process a little bit more by preparing, and not over preparing, but just saying like, hey, here's a couple references that we're using, maybe here's a color scheme, here's an artist. Like, we just did one where we brought in an artist to do her color scheme because we liked her color scheme, so that we can have like more of like control it through the process, so that we can see it the way that we want it. We want it to be seen in the end.
You become like your own video producers too. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I've been now too that I have that experience. Like, I've been helping other bands produce their videos and stuff,
Oh, cool.
and it becomes easier because like now it's just like my vibe on producing the video right now is just like, hey, let's have fun. Like, how can we have a fun moment together and capture that on video? Because that's an easy way without a large amount of budget. I wrote a grant when I was like had nothing to do during COVID, about trying to make a music video for a band in the neighborhood I live in. And like, I just found this bike shop that I knew the guy who owned it, and he had a lot of dusty lowrider bikes. And I was like, let's rent these bikes from him and ride them around the block, all day. And then we did that, and we got, a great thing out of it. And the problem the band was having over and over again is they wanted to make a video, but they could never get to that point of execution of it. So we just boiled it down to something very simple, and we were able to execute it. So you just got to kind of find for what your project is. I think, how can we do something that's going to feel right, and maybe not bite off too much that you can't chew, because I've done that. We've all done that, where we try to do something so grand and then it comes out looking real cheesy or something.
The mayor campaign really also pushed us into getting our poop in a group for videos, because we had these like public service announcements, and we didn't publish half of the videos, that not even a quarter of the videos that we had dreamt, like, oh, let's do this, let's do that, let's do this. And with all the other things that I had to be a part of, we could only do so many. And again, fast turnaround, and me and Greg would write a script, we'd record it here at home, and then we would go and shoot on an iPhone videos. And that led us to getting 3 mini episodes for public TV. And similarly, like, tight turnaround, very little experience, zero experience in TV at the time. And we did it the same way, like, we wrote a script, we recorded it at home, and then we filmed it, kind of mimed it, and we didn't even have time to edit any of it, and so like it looks cheesy, but that was kind of the point. It was like story time with Kaylin of the future, and now we get to say, hey, we did a TV show, you know, and like we learned so much just from that one shot, you know. We're like, oh, next time we could have a teleprompter. We didn't think about that, you know. You know, next time if we had, you know, an extra week to edit, you know. So yeah, we're still figuring it out, and every little project has kind of given us like more experience to make the next one better. And you know, working with um, Chris as many times as we had, I'm super confident that this video is going to be the best one. Um, but you know, it's taken a lot of tug of war.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, I'm like really enjoying talking to you guys, but I'm over minutes into my Microsoft Teams office hours that I'm supposed to be in. Right, my face is supposed to be on another.
That's okay. I have a class to teach as well.
Okay, but
Obviously, we could do this all day.
yeah, thank you so much for.
Hey, thank you for having us and for
Yeah,
doing
yeah,
everything you've done for
yeah. I
my
love your
endeavor.
music, and
Yeah.
yeah, can't wait to hear the new stuff.
Rachel, thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah, thanks guys. We appreciate it. It was fun hanging out.
yeah.
Yeah, and feel free to hit us up anytime. Wheelchair Sports Camp is real easy to find on the internet, and I'm pretty good at messaging back.
Okay, great. Thanks again.
Roger. We appreciate you having us.
Sure. Talk to you later.